So moving along here in Blood Meridian, we're at chapter 15, and this chapter chronicles really the beginnings of the complete decline of the Glanton gang. They're losing their energy, they're losing their cohesiveness, they're losing their power to effectuate the deeds, and entropy is slowly catching up with them. So as it starts, they have received from the town of Urus in Sonora a new contract to go and get more Apache scalps. So they set out with this intention, but all they can do is come across a Pueblo village, and Pueblo peoples are always peaceful, they're farmer folk, at Nakazari, and they massacre them and then scalp them, take the scalps with them, and then go along their way. But now the Mexican government has sent out a contingent under General Elias, and note that his name is Elias. Elias is the prophet who comes after Elijah in, I think it's Kings in the Bible. And Elijah was the prophet who was counter to Ahab, and Ahab was married to a pagan woman named Jezebel, who was a Canaanite, constantly trying to get Ahab to worship false gods. And this is what Elijah was constantly warning him against, which is why in Moby Dick we have Captain Ahab, who ends up being a polytheist when a crew of Zoroastrian fire worshippers comes up from below decks and they convert him to the pagan religion of Zoroastrianism, and why he is also warned before they leave by a prophet guy named Elijah, who's standing there warning of the doom of the expedition. Here we have General Elias and his troops. So they get into a skirmish, and 7 of their men are wounded, but 4 of them are wounded pretty much mortally. They cannot ride. And so what they do is they draw lots. Glanton creates a quiver with arrows in it, and they draw lots for 3 men who have to put these other 4 men out of their misery. And the 4 men are 2 of the Delaware Indians. One, the Mexican, I think he's the only Mexican in the gang. His name might be McGill, if I remember, but I can't remember for sure. And then Shelby. One of the surviving Delaware Indians draws one of the arrows, and then a man named Tate, and then of course the kid. So they all have to. The gang then leaves while these guys have to perform the unpleasant task of putting their fellow gang members out of their misery. So they have to be left behind. And the Delaware doesn't seem to have too much trouble. He has a club, and he simply comes up and smashes the 2 skulls of the 2 dying Delawares, smashes their skulls, gets on his horse, and leaves, which leaves Tate alone with the kid. And Tate is supposed to kill the Mexican who is dying. He's got a shot in his lungs, and he's wheezing. Clearly he's not going to live long. Tate chickens out and leaves. So this just leaves the kid with Shelby. And Shelby is there, and he basically begs for his life. The kid shows compassion and refuses to kill him, and pulls him away, shoves him into the bushes so that the Apaches, when they find him, he might stand a chance of survival. His hip has been crushed, I think, and he can't walk. Now note that the kid, alone of all these characters, is the only one who's ever shown any signs of compassion. Both in this scene, he shows compassion for Shelby, and in a previous chapter a ways back, there was an episode that I did not mention where one of the Glanton guys had got shot with an arrow in his leg, and he was begging everyone in the camp to help remove the arrow, and no one would do it. But the kid volunteered to do it, so he had to push the arrow through so that it pokes out, take off the spear tip, and then yank it back out the other way. So again, compassion. So the kid, we don't know a whole lot about this guy, and if there are any failings of this novel, it is that the characterization is not that great. The characters are kind of, they're just sort of ciphers filling in slots. The judge is really the only one who stands out in 3-dimensionality as this larger-than-life figure who's a kind of sort of combination of Ahab and Moby Dick. He's an albino, like Moby Dick. So we don't know that much about the kid, except for these 2 episodes of compassion that he shows, which in the end of the novel will turn out to be the reason why the judge kills him. because the judge claims that he was too soft, too merciful, and the judge doesn't like compassion, so he kills him at the end. So, and leaving these guys behind is a little bit like the Greek myth of Philoctetes, where he gets an arrow wound that stinks so badly, and he's complaining about it that they have to leave him behind on the island of Lemnos. Back behind that myth goes to the Mesopotamian myth of Gilgamesh's father, Lugalbanda, who is part of an expedition with his 7 brothers on the way to Arata, and he falls sick, and they have to leave him behind, and they put him in a cave with the full expectation that he'll die. But as a matter of fact, he's regenerated by the cosmic powers of Inanna, Venus, Nanasene, the moon god, and Shamash, the sun. They all shine through cracks in the cave, and after 3 days, like Christ, Lugalbanda is regenerated. Here these guys are just left behind. Tough luck. We never hear about them again. And then so the rest of the novel is concerned with the kid now on his own, which is interesting because up to this point in the novel, McCarthy has been talking about the group as a collective assemblage, and the kid has disappeared. He's been averaged out into this assemblage. And so now, for the first time, since the first couple of chapters anyway, McCarthy separates the kid out to have his own adventure, as though to remind the reader that he is still here, and it is, after all, supposedly from his point of view that we're telling this. But it's a little bit, this is a postmodern novel in which the old idea of the Bildungsroman, that we follow the development of an individual, like in Goethe's novel Wilhelm Meister, we follow how his development, or Hans Castorp in The Magic Mountain. That is, those days are gone in the postmodern novel. Thomas Pynchon does this also in Against the Day. There is no main character in Against the Day. It's a huge collective assemblage of characters. There is no one character that you can identify with that will take you through. The kid is the closest thing in this narrative to a protagonist and to somebody that you can at least vaguely sympathize with, because he does have a certain amount of compassion. So we follow him in the wilderness on his own, and it's a bit like the scene in that movie The Revenant by Inarritu, which is a masterpiece. I think it's one of the greatest westerns ever made, with Leonardo DiCaprio playing a character named Hugh Glass, who we see all these incredible scenes where it's snowing and he has to hide himself inside the carcass of a horse, and so he doesn't freeze to death, and then he comes out. Then there are these wolves on fire that he encounters with arrows in them, that a Pawnee chief has shot arrows into them and lit them on fire, and they're going across the plains, these fire wolves. He's lit them on fire because he wants the buffalo that they have tried to kill, that he then has to share with Hugh Glass. So it's a bit like that. The kid's adventures as he's going through the snow and trying to survive, and he comes across all the scalps that the Glanton gang has cut from these miserable Pueblo dwellers in Nacozari. They've just simply left behind. They recognize that they're worthless and burned them. And the kid comes across this smoking ruin of all these scalps, and he's trying to catch back up with the gang. For a while, he's with Tate and his 3-legged horse, but they don't make it. They disappear. There's another skirmish with Elias, who sees them in the snow. They have a bit of a shootout. Tate doesn't make it, and the kid does. So we keep following him. And then there are a couple of really cool images. McCarthy's a master of just absolutely astonishing images that I want to draw your attention to. So as he's going along, he comes across, he meets back up with the Glanton gang. Finally, he catches up with them, and they look pretty worn out. They've lost a few men in skirmishes with Elias. Elias is hunting them, so he's got General Elias, the Mexican troops, behind them, and the Apache in front of them that they're supposed to scalp. But by this point, by the time they catch up to these Apache, they don't fight them. They're out of energy. That's it. Mangus Colorado is the name of their leader, and they have to bribe him with whiskey just to get by. So they're on their way out. They're running out of energy. And so as they're going along, as he's caught up with the Glanton gang, now he's back with them. They give him a canteen. They're going along, and they come across this circle of heads, which is another unforgettable, wonderful McCarthy image, where they see on the sort of flat plane a circle of human heads, 8 of them. McCarthy calls one of the subtitles of the chapter the Ogdoad. This is the Ogdoad of 8 heads, all facing outwards in a circle, all with hats. One of the guys walks over and kicks one over just to make sure perhaps that it's not attached to a body down below. It isn't. So there's that incredible image. And then they keep going, and then they find the ruins of a party of Argonauts. The Argonauts are the settlers in covered wagons, and they find the torsos in the ruins of these wagons that McCarthy compares beautifully to like sunken ships. They're just skeletons that have been burned to a crisp by the Apaches. So there's that, and then food starts to become an issue with them once again. And so the judge decides they're going to have to kill and eat a horse, one of their horses. And he's standing there and he says, I need somebody to help me do this. And the kid is sitting there, and Tobin, the ex-priest, warns him and says, don't listen to him, just keep away from him. And the kid stands up and says, I ain't afraid of him. So he walks over into the darkness with the judge, and they lead the horse away, and the judge takes a huge rock and smashes the horse's skull. Then they strip the horse, they fry it up, and they eat it exactly like Paleolithic hunters. And at this point, McCarthy is sort of drawing your attention to them as having devolved. They keep devolving and degenerating, just like in the novel Child of God. Lester Ballard constantly degenerates with his serial killings until he's eventually living like a caveman in a cave. And in a way, the characters of the Glanton gang are sort of Lester Ballard multiplied. They have the same kind of debauchery, the same kind of amorality, the same kind of evil. They're just embodiments of human wretchedness, fallenness, and evil. Only the kid among them is somebody we could possibly identify with as a protagonist. So they kill and they eat this horse, just like Paleolithic hunters eating a mammoth. And then, let's see, and then at the end, they come to finally make it to Santa Cruz. They're on their way north, headed to the Colorado River. So they make it to the town of Santa Cruz, which is pretty shabby and it's falling apart. And word has come that they're on their way. So a lot of people are hiding. But one small family with a barn invites them in for a little meal. They come in. By this point, they're almost harmless. Not many people are afraid of them at this point. They're running out of energy. And they have to sleep in a barn. So they put them up in a barn with these horses. And so they've devolved to the point where nobody's hosting them in a hostel. No more great hotels for them. They're pretty wretched. They've devolved to the level of beasts and animals, and they deserve to live in a barn along with other beasts and animals. But McCarthy has this weird final paragraph that I want to read. And reading through this chapter is an absolute pleasure. It's just such good writing. But this last sentence describing them in the barn is a little weird. It says, no one moved. In that cold stable, the shutting of the door may have evoked in some hearts other hostels, and not of their choosing. The mare sniffed uneasily, and the young colts stepped about. Then one by one they began to divest themselves of their outer clothes, the hide slickers and raw wool seraps and vests, and one by one they propagated about themselves a great crackling of sparks, and each man was seen to wear a shroud of palest fire. Their arms aloft, pulling at their clothes, were luminous, and each obscure soul was enveloped in audible shapes of light, as if it had always been so. The mare at the far end of the stable snorted and shied at this luminosity in being so endarkened, and the little horse turned and hid his face in the web of his dam's flank. Interesting scene where, as they're getting undressed in order to lie down to sleep, they emit this glow as though each man has an aura about them. And it is, of course, a very dark aura because these men are vibrating at the lowest possible frequency on the spectrum of human emotions. They're just pure incarnations of degenerate evil and corruption. Once again, just like Lester Ballard in Child of God. So we'll leave it there. That's the wonderful chapter 15 of McCarthy's Blood Meridian.